Hi everyone, it's Nicole for Simon Says Stamp, and today I'm sharing this Delicate Flowers No Masking card. These images are all from the Delicate Flowers stamp set and were stamped on Bristol smooth cardstock using a clear embossing ink and absolutely no masking paper. This technique works really well when you are stamping and embossing on especially a white background. I'm going to start with my images and kind of lay them out on my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch background to get the basic design of what I want to do here. I knew that I wanted my greeting in the upper third on the right of my card. And then I'm going to have some leaves and things coming out from a large floral bloom and also some smaller buds coming from this. We're essentially creating our own collage. Simon Says Stamp has some really beautiful large collage stamps as well if you don't want to create your own design. I loved the flowers in this Delicate Flowers stamp set and thought it would be fun to showcase how to create your own with absolutely no die cutting or masking of any kind. This large flower is going to be used as the focal point, and then we're going to build out from there with 3 different leaf designs and 2 buds. Once I have the basic layout, I can go ahead and pick up my largest stamp. We want to stamp that one first, and then we'll stamp all of the remaining images coming out from this largest one. So I'm going to carefully remove these from my MISTI, use a powder tool on my Bristol smooth cardstock, and then stamp that large floral from the Delicate Flowers stamp set with some clear embossing ink. I'm going to press that in place and then heat emboss this with white embossing powder. You definitely wouldn't have to use white. You could use any color of embossing powder that you want. I think antique gold would be really pretty with this technique as well. For this first flower, all we have to do is simply heat this up and melt the embossing powder. I do want to make sure to hit both the front and the back of this panel to eliminate warping. I'm going to place my background back in the MISTI, and now I'm ready to stamp some additional florals. I'm going to clean off this stamp set, or pardon me, this stamp, and we're going to stamp our next image. I'm going to stamp the larger of the 2 flower buds next. I'm going to lay them both out, both the leaf, the little leaf cluster and that flower, so that I can get a good idea of exactly where I want this. I think this is really effective as well when parts of the image are stamped off the side of the panel. Gives you the illusion of a much bigger collage or image than what they actually are. We're going to sprinkle the embossing powder on, and then before we emboss, anything that overlaps that first floral, I'm going to wipe away with a dry paintbrush. Very, very easy. Then we're going to go ahead and heat set the next flower. I'll place this panel back in my MISTI and we'll stamp that next leaf cluster. I'm also going to stamp the sentiment from the stamp set with a black ink. But I want my sentiment to really stand out, and we're even going to incorporate a little black and white diagonal stripe paper in the finished card. Now I'm stamping the little leaf cluster, again using my powder tool to help keep the embossing powder only on the stamped image. We'll sprinkle on the embossing powder and again wipe away any of the embossing powder that overlaps either of the images that we've already stamped. I think that gives you a little bit better idea of wiping it away, and then I'll go ahead and heat set this third image. We've got 3 more images that go along the bottom edge of the card. So we're going to go ahead and grab our next image now. So we've got this leaf, this larger leaf piece that's kind of nice and long, a smaller bud, and then a couple more leaves. So let's go ahead and stamp the second little flower bud next. We'll sprinkle on our embossing powder. Anywhere where that ink overlaps what we've already stamped, we're just going to take our dry paintbrush and remove that embossing powder from that area. And then we can heat set this next flower. This is so much quicker and easier than having to mask each and every area or image. We'll do the larger leaf next, and just a tip of one of those flowers is going to hang off the bottom edge of the card panel. We'll add our embossing powder. We'll take our dry paintbrush and remove anything that's overlapping, and then we will heat set this image as well. And finally, we will have one additional image left to use to kind of fill in that area and add some nice greenery. And then we can start the process of a quick watercolor and then some very easy finishing details that bring this background to life. This would work with many different floral stamp sets. Wiping away just a little bit here. There wasn't a ton to get rid of, just a little tiny bit. Making sure anywhere that they potentially overlap, I get rid of that. And then heat setting. I'm going to take just 4 colors of Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers to color in my images. Starting with Carmine Red, we're just going to lay down some quick color on the flowers. Once I start watercoloring this, it will be a little bit easier to see. I'm pulling that color out with a pale pink marker. This isn't a color combination I use a lot, but instead of making the flowers look super red like the red carmine, this tends to give them a nice dark pink color that I really, really love. I could go ahead and color these all in with just the markers, but I want them to have a little bit of a watercolor look, so I'm going to take a water brush marker and pull that color out with my water brush marker, filling in all of the embossed areas. So I've laid down the Carmine Red first, then pulled out some of that color and extended that with pale pink, and then I'm blending it all with a water brush pen. You can really start to see the flower take shape as I add more and more color to these images. I worked in small areas and I noticed that I missed a few flower petals as I was working, so I'm going to fill that in before I add the greenery around each flower. I'm using another new color combination to me, one that I haven't used before but I really like. This is Emerald Green and Green Shadow. It's almost a mint kind of color, which was really what I was going for because I'm going to use a little mint cardstock border on my card that really matches nicely. So if you love the mint color combination, Emerald Green and Green Shadow create a fantastic mint type color. Now where the stems on my flowers are embossed white, it's really not going to show up great. So what I ended up doing was tracing all of the stems with my emerald green marker. You'll see that in a little bit because right now it just looks like a scattering of leaves on a white background without a stem. We'll go ahead and add some color to the second flower the same way we did the first one. And then add the green around the base of this flower as well as the stem. I've also seen a couple of places around my large flower that I missed some leaves, so I'll go back in and fill those in with my green markers and water brush pen. I'm going to quickly go through and add color now to the rest of the leaves with my emerald green marker. Then I'll grab the green shadow and pull some of that dark color out. Some of the leaves I can completely blend just with this marker itself. For some of the bigger ones, I'll take the water brush pen and watercolor all of that out. Very quick coloring. I always like to keep a paper towel nearby to clean off the tip of my water brush pen and a scrap piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock to clean off the tips of my markers where the darker color might have transferred to the lighter marker. Here are those stems that I was talking about, which instantly help with the design of this card. I've got one last bloom left that I will add my carmine red and pale pink to, and then watercolor that. I want to make sure that the background is completely dry because I'm going to splatter a little distress paint over the background to give it a little bit of interest. I'm going to use a box and splatter on some cracked pistachio and even some brushed pewter distress paint. The brushed pewter I used very, very minimally. I've got a scrap of Simon Says Stamp mint cardstock that I'm going to use one of my favorite dies from Simon, a scallop stitches die. This is one of the smallest scallop from this set. There's 3 different sizes. And we're going to die cut that scallop border to place along the right edge of our card. We're going to need to trim down our background, but I'm waiting for that paint to dry first. I also want to pull in a little black and white stripe to tie in to our black stamped sentiment. If you don't have the right pattern paper, I always love having background stamps for creating my own. The diagonal stripes background from Simon Says Stamp is one of my most used and loved stamps. I'm going to create a black and white striped pattern on a scrap of white cardstock. I only need a thin strip, so I'm just going to stamp it along one side of this. I noticed that my stamp has lost a little bit of its cling and I was having a hard time getting it to pick up. I think my Misty also needs a really good cleaning as well as the front of this stamp. Once I have that pressed in place, I'm going to use some VersaFine ONYX black ink to stamp my stripes. I chose this ink because it's a pigment ink and it's going to really stamp a nice dark pattern without having to stamp it too many times like you might have to with a dye ink. I did end up stamping it twice to get a bold black and white stripe. Then I'll trim that into a thin strip. Once my background is completely dry, I'm going to trim off about 1/4 of an inch, maybe just slightly more off of that right side. And then we are ready to put it all together. On a white top fold card base, I'm going to adhere the black and white stripe to the right side of the card first. Then we're going to adhere that scallop stitches border behind our floral border. I'll go ahead and put some additional adhesive on the back of this panel while I have it flipped over. I'm going to remove just one strip of that and then adhere that little stitched and scallop border to the right side. Add a little bit more adhesive. Then we can remove the backing paper from all of these strips and place this right on our card base. It's going to leave us with a little thin black and white diagonal stripe along the right side, that mint scallop strip, and then our beautiful watercolored background. And there is a look at the finished card design. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this watercolored, no masking, floral card featuring the Simon Says Stamp Delicate Flowers stamp set. The supplies I used to create my card are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Simon Says stamps and dies that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll catch you next time.